You are listening to Readers and Writers with your hosts, James Hill and Athena Paris. I'm Amy Ravichandran, and today we're talking about what motivates you as a writer. There's all kinds of things. I feel like maybe me personally, motivation, I think is different for each genre, right? I feel like you have to find different motivations to kind of inspire creativity and thinking in different genres. So I'm going to kick it to Athena first. So Athena, what motivates you to write?
Well, motivation comes obviously from everything that we see, experience, and all those things. But a lot of my own personal motivation comes from characters. Once I've created them, I'm interested in them. And so I'm very looking forward to discovering what they are all about. So that motivates me because then I'm excited to sit down and start writing about this person and seeing what they reveal to me. Um, that is basically what my motivation is. It's my characters and the way I'm developing the story that motivates me.
I think this is like a carry on from last week when we were talking about the routines and the moods and that kind of stuff. Motivation is an inspiration. What inspires that particular story? And for me, it's usually something I heard or something I read, a situation. Being a sci-fi writer, which is where I kind of like cut my teeth on writing, I was more of a sci-fi writer when I started. You hear a certain development or a certain procedure or a new technology coming out, and it gives you that what if moment or that what would it be like if this was carried forward, and that gives me the inspiration that I need to develop the character, to develop the situation from it, uh, to to kind of like get that story rolling in my head. And so my inspirations come from many different things. A lot of it comes from the news. A lot of it comes from situations that happen that I see happening, not just to me personally, because some of it, but I kind of like internalize it too.
Yeah.
I take in a situation, I see something, and I would say, what would it be like if this happened to me? Or what would it be like if I was that person? I also grew up in the space age. So, if everybody wanted to be an astronaut. When people went to the moon, it was a big, big thing. And I
Right.
grew up on the way up to the moon because when they started the space races, when I was, young and a kid, and being the idea of this was such an immense undertaking, and for a person to climb aboard that rocket and all that thrust and all that power, and you were like, I would love to sit in that chair and
Mm,
be that person, you
yeah.
know. And so, as a sci-fi writer, it just it was like blew me away.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I knew if I couldn't do it personally, I could write about it. I could experience it through my imagination. And that's where my inspiration came from. And then it blossoms into other things that live your life and you become more of a well-rounded different genre author, like crime story, fantasy stories, but it's always been to me an internal type of motivation.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. I was like, so, what would you consider like an external motivation? Because you mentioned, the space races, that's like an external thing, right? So, I mean, how would you classify that? Because that external thing, the space races and everything kind of motivated you internally to live that through writing, right? So, do you have to have external and internal motivations? Like, how does that work?
It depends. I think that sometimes what happens with writers is that we actually want to fix things.
Mm-hmm.
And our stories actually reflect that because of the way we write our plots and our characters. We are fixing something. Well, actually, we don't just fix things. There's different types of writing. There are writers who are exposing things.
Right.
There are writers who are trying to fix things. And I would say that maybe a lot of romance writers are maybe in the fixing things, because hence why they like a happy ending. Because in real life, not everything is happy. We know this. So the expositions and the exposing of terrible things in the world reflect themselves in some writers' works, obviously. And so we have the difference between what we are trying to accomplish. And I think some of us like to take everything we see, put it in a story, and show that, see, there's a happy ending. Look
Right.
how I took all these problems and traumas and things, and I fixed something. And it made people happy. And another writer will take a lot of different things, which actually reflects completely what James writes about sometimes, because he writes a lot of crime stories. And I see that in his writing. He's exposing the ugliness of specific areas of society, and it is ugly. And you, as the writer that I am, that I want to fix things, I react to his characters and his plots because nothing is fixed in his stories. You
James,
know,
why can't you fix stuff, man? What's going on? Don't
Because
upset
that's not
Athena.
the way the
Come on.
world is. and
Don't
she's reading my latest story, my latest crime story, which is Killer with Black Blood from the Killer
Right.
series. And she's always telling me, but they're horrible people, but they're so bad. And I keep telling her, yes, they are. They're mobsters, they're gangsters. These are horrible people.
Hey, they need love too, man.
They do need
They're
love.
loved by somebody. They're
They
loved by
do
their
need love,
mama.
and they are loved by the other mobsters and gangsters in their world. they,
yeah.
they have
So
their friends and and their and that's the external, and that is the external of the story. I see the crime stories and you see these things on the news and everything. And yes, I internalize it, put myself in that place, but the external motivation is, wow, look at that story. How did that come about? And
Right.
not how can I fix it so much, but how could I tell the story? How can I expose this? And the Killer series, I'm kind of like exposing these people to the world. These because you don't never really see the entire story. You never really see the entire person. You can't. No
Right.
one's there with a camera telling you what this person is doing with that person. And they're definitely not going to tell you what they did. So as a writer, I can expose that world to to a wider audience, things
Mhm.
that you won't know. One of the things I always notice is, and has to come with the things that have been happening recently with all the shootings and stuff like that. The police would really like to take a person alive because they would really like to find out what the motivation was for the crime they committed, you know. And everybody think, oh, this it was racially motivated, it was terrorist motivated, it was. But if the person dies, you really never really know what the motivation was of that person, and sometimes you're completely wrong behind what you think motivated that person. And
Right.
if the person is really mentally unstable, their motivation could be anything. It could be they had green peas last night and they did not like the way it tasted. and next morning they're off shooting up the place or something like that. So they really like to get the person alive so they can see what the motivation is behind
yeah.
what they did, the action behind. And that's what, when you write crime stories, that's the external. That's what you really want to bring out in that crime story. You want to bring out the motivation behind your character. And even if you internalize it and put yourself in the story, you still want to expose the reader to what's really driving the story.
Yeah.
And even if they're bad people, they do have motivation. They do have goals they are trying to obtain, Athena.
Yeah, no, I know. It's exactly that, because you can see it. I mean, these people are highly motivated by what they do and what they believe in. It's just, obviously, as um, part of I'm more on the calm side. So obviously I don't, I mean, in writing, I understand why everything is written and that you,
I write with the tagline of I have a dark slant on life. That's kind
yeah,
of like my tagline. So even if I'm writing science fiction, if I'm writing fantasy, I tend to slide toward the dark side of life. What can I tell you?
Right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I know, James, you write different genres, and Athena, you're breaking into writing different genres. So do you find different motivations for whatever genre you're writing, or do they all kind of carry over where it's the same motivation behind it, but it's just towards a different genre that you're writing? Sorry, my
No,
dog's going crazy.
it's actually
That's okay.
you kind of have to think a little bit differently for each of them. I mean, it's the same you, and you're writing, your talent is being used, but you notice that you focus on different specifics when you're writing the different genres. You know, you tend to go slightly different into the different problems that you face, because in a romance, for example, the problem might be family interfering, you know, so that's the big
Right.
problem, because these two people can't get together. Now they have to figure out how to stay together and be happy and not care about what the family thinks. In a fantasy or a sci-fi, it might be the aliens are after you. It's a different problem. So it's,
Right. Okay.
you know, so how would you fight a completely different type of people? So now you start thinking differently because your life is at risk. You know, and there's a lot of technology in fantasy, is all kinds of magic and potions and poisons and all kinds of things, and what's who's trying to do what and why. It usually, it might be something about power, you know, having so you see, you think slightly different for each kind of genre.
Yeah, and each genre kind of like lends itself to a different motivated. It's sort of like style.
Right.
And when you look at a genre by style, there's a certain not formula but style to that particular genre. Sci-fi is more scientific, more fact-driven stories. You have to have some kind of concrete basis for your story. And the motivation behind sci-fi is you want to tell a story that will change humanity, change the outlook, change the way the world operates. So that's a different motivation than if you come to fantasy. In fantasy, you still want to change the world, but you don't want to change it globally. You want to change how people feel about the world, how people react and live within this world. You're not actually trying to change the world as much as you are trying to change how people are in that world. Like
Right.
romance, he was saying that it's a personal change you're going through. It's a change between two people and how they feel towards each other, how the rest of the world is twisting and turning their situation. So the motivations of the different genres kind of like drive the story. And yeah, there is a difference between writing sci-fi, fantasy, romance, crime story. In a crime story, the motivation usually is solving some sort of crime or
Right.
solving some sort of mystery, getting to the end of a particular situation, you know?
Yeah.
So again, sort of like with a romance, crime stories are kind of like romances. Only thing is you may not have a happy ending, but it's a personal type of situation that drives crime stories. You know, somebody been murdered, you want to find that person, mystery type of thing, or
Yeah.
you have this great idea to get rich,
Yeah.
and you're going to go ahead and do this, and then there's all sorts of situations that come up because your idea to get rich wasn't really a good idea.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. The difference also between why fantasy and sci-fi is put sometimes together completely. Um, apart from what romance and mystery and crime is that usually fantasy and sci-fi revolve around survival of the species sometimes. So it's a grand scale storytelling, especially in sci-fi, because you have planets. You're not just talking about communities and a country, but you're talking about entire planets sometimes. So now your writing has to be a very expansive, because you are now dealing with things that we are not completely certain about, hence why it's science fiction, because we haven't been to many other planets. The only we are putting our toes in is the nearby Mars, and that's all that we know about. So sci-fi is very grand storytelling, and fantasy is usually there's some kind of strange power grab, so to speak, whereas romance and crime and all the goals are different. They are more, they're located on ground earth. So it's
Right.
kind of a smaller scope of storytelling. So it's completely different, the genres.
Right. Well, you guys need to join us next week on Readers and Writers, because Rock Hill is busting into young or authors that are targeting young readers. So it's a new avenue for Rock Hill, and we're going to be talking about it all next week. So make sure you guys tune in. So bye for now.